Okay, and with that, I think we are live. And when I say we, I mean me. It's just me this time, everybody. It's been a long time since I've done one of these on my own. It's great to be with you all this Monday afternoon. Thanks for joining me today. It's good to be with you all on August 10th. Here, the 159th anniversary of the Battle of Wilson's Creek. So I'll let this go for a little bit, give people time to get on the stream and things like that, for you all to share the stream and pass that along and things of that nature. Get more people to jump on with us today. While we're waiting to get things started, I'd love it if you A, shared the stream, and B, liked the stream. That would mean a lot to me and to us here at the National Museum of Civil War Medicine. For those of you that don't know me, my name is John Lustrea. I'm the Education Coordinator at the National Museum of Civil War Medicine, which is where I am today. I'm actually in my office here at the museum, so that's exciting. I was working at the front desk this past weekend and I'm in the office today, so it's exciting to come back in, get out of the house, and see things. So go ahead and comment if you're watching, where you're from, and all that good stuff. And we're going to be talking about the Battle of Wilson's Creek here shortly. I'm just going to pull a couple other things up on my other monitors. I have my notes, which you can't see. I have my notes up behind me here. So I'm just going to pull a couple things up real quick. So bear with me here. Again, thank you for tuning in. I really appreciate it. It means the world to us. Okay, I see we got Barbara tuning in from New Jersey, of course. Robert Smith from Claremont, Florida. Excellent. Joe from the Wilderness. Thanks so much for tuning in. Well, if you've seen these videos before, you know the drill. We really appreciate you watching, of course, and we would really appreciate it if you all were able to become a member of the museum. It would go a long ways to supporting the work that we do here, support these videos directly if you've involved them, if you've enjoyed them. I'm going to post a link in the comments for becoming a member. So if you could, it's for as little as $25 a year, good for an entire year in supporting the museum, and you don't even have to renew if you don't want to. So becoming a member means a world of difference, and you can do that at civilwarmed.org/support. So I think I'm having trouble with my my comments section. I don't know if it showed up there. So anyway, it'd be great if you could do that, or even if you could make a donation, which you should be able to do from that same page, civilwarmed.org/support. We would really appreciate it. And we're so thankful for those of you who have signed up already. You've got a long way towards helping us continue our mission and continue to bring programming like this to you. And if there's someone you know that really wanted to catch this stream but isn't able to, never fear. These videos continue to exist on our Facebook page after long after we're done recording, and eventually they appear on our YouTube channel as well. So if someone prefers YouTube to Facebook, you can let them know that they'll be there eventually. Go ahead, and if you have any questions throughout my presentation here, go ahead and drop them in the comments, and I will do my very best to get to them when I can. So I'm going to pull up a PowerPoint here, so you have something to look at, few visuals to reference, and we'll get started talking about medical care at the Battle of Wilson's Creek. And I should mention, August 10th today is the 159th anniversary of the Battle of Wilson's Creek. So it's well timed, this conversation is. So while I'm sharing my screen like this, I can't see your comments, so I'll come back to them at the end, and I'll get to them there. So Wilson's Creek, one of the first battles of the Civil War, not the first, but takes place on August 10th, 1861 in Missouri. And for those of you out there who are thinking Wilson's Creek, I haven't heard about it, it doesn't get talked about a lot because it's not one of the biggest battles of the Civil War, and it takes place pretty far west relative to most of the battles you hear more about, which happen in Virginia, places like Bull Run, Chancellorsville, Fredericksburg, or Antietam here in Maryland, or Gettysburg up in Pennsylvania. Compared to all that, Wilson's Creek is hundreds of miles away, and in Missouri, and on a much smaller scale. But since it is one of the very first battles of the Civil War, especially in a pretty rural area out in Missouri, not a lot of cities near the battlefield, it's an interesting look into sort of how the military medical department approached what they thought was going to happen during the Civil War, which, as we'll see, they're not quite prepared, and indeed, how could they be for what was going to come. So to start off with, let's talk about why exactly we're at the Battle of Wilson's Creek. How does this battle come to be out in Missouri? Well, Missouri is one of the 4 border states during the Civil War. So with the bombardment on Fort Sumter in April of 1861, some southern states are seceding from the Union. The Confederacy is sort of completed in the middle of April 1861, but there are 4 slaveholding states that are still debating whether or not to join the Confederacy. That's Delaware, Maryland, Kentucky, and Missouri. And ultimately, those 4 states will not leave the Union, although they're not totally gung-ho with the federal government either. And so hence they're called the border states. And Missouri, all of these states, though, are critically important to remain in the Union, at least from the perspective of the federal government. Got to keep them there. And specifically talking about Missouri, I'll share a map here of Missouri. There's waterways that are important. Notably, and hopefully you can see my mouse here, the Mississippi River, which goes down here. That's going to be critically important throughout the war, and the Missouri River, which kind of cuts east-west through the state there. These 2 waterways are critically important, and of course there's several railroads, most of which emanate from St. Louis, which is itself a notable city. St. Louis is a railway hub, and of course is right at the conjunction of the Mississippi and Missouri River. So there's lots of geography, geographic features, lines of transportation and such that are very important that they remain within the Union. And so a Union general by the name of Nathaniel Lyon, the irascible Nathaniel Lyon, kind of looks a little bit like a lion. Here's a picture of him. Nathaniel Lyon takes control of the Union forces in the area, some of which he raises himself personally. And he starts from St. Louis, and his first job is to protect a federal arsenal there. I was reading today, I think it's something like the 4th largest stockpile of weapons in the entire country, and to not let those weapons fall into secessionist hands. So that's his very first job. Now, those secessionist forces in Missouri come to be known as the Missouri State Guard, and they'll be under the command of this gentleman, General Sterling Price. He's a Mexican War veteran. And ultimately, Lyon, over the course of late April, May, June, and throughout most of July, spends pretty much that time slowly moving the Missouri State Guard forces out of the St. Louis area, and he slowly kind of moves them kind of down towards the southwest corner of the state. And you'll notice that Wilson's Creek is quite close to the Arkansas and Kansas borders down here in that southwest corner. So it takes months and hundreds of miles, and there's not really any pitched battles that take place between, during this time of moving the Missouri State Guard to the corner of the state. But Union forces under Nathaniel Lyon end up kind of pinning the Confederate Missouri State Guard forces in the southwest corner of the state. And the hope is that one decisive battle would give the Union basically complete control of the state of Missouri, which, as I mentioned earlier, for control of the rivers and the rail lines would be very important to do so. Now, while the Confederate forces are stationed down there biding their time, waiting for their next move in the southwest corner of the state, they're getting reinforcements. New Confederate battalions coming up from Arkansas to the south are reinforcing the Missouri State Guard, as well as other units coming from the kind of northern portion, kind of along the Missouri River there, in what was the secessionist portion of the state, kind of in the northern part. They're all gathering, which swells the Confederate force to about 12,000 soldiers. Meanwhile, Nathaniel Lyon's soldiers stationed at Springfield, which is just a little bit northeast of what will become the battlefield of Wilson's Creek. Lyon's soldiers, they're like many Union soldiers in the beginning of the war, they signed 3-month enlistment papers. And so their 3 months were coming to an end. And so Lyon's force is shrinking while the Confederate force is growing. And by the time early August rolls around, the Union force is outnumbered just about 2 to 1, about 6,000 to 12,000 or thereabouts. So with all that as the backdrop, that's kind of how we get to where we are. And now I want to start painting the scene. I have this set up in 3 kind of different phases. The lead up to the battle, what happens during the battle, and then of course the aftermath of the battle. So to start with, both armies have to get to Wilson's Creek. And I'm sure for the soldiers involved, this was really quite something to reflect on, in the days leading up to the battle in August of 1861, because just 4 or 5 months ago, they were not in any sort of army type of thing, and I'm sure they never expected to find themselves in southwest Missouri. There are soldiers here from Iowa, from the Kansas Territory, of course, from Missouri, some from Arkansas, some Confederate soldiers even from Texas. It's amazing how much can change in just a few months. Certainly something we're experiencing in our own modern times about this incredible rate of change. But anyway, so you get soldiers coming to this place. And Assistant Surgeon Philip C. Davis from the Union Army, he commented leading up to the battle on the general good condition of the Union Army on the eve of battle. The weather was good, the water was abundant, and the health of the troops excellent. Those are his words. Now, that wasn't the experience of everybody. Another Union surgeon, Surgeon Samuel Melcher, talked about the march to Springfield. He was with the 5th Missouri Infantry, and their route went from the city of Rolla, which you can see there, all the way down to Springfield. His men marched about 200 miles in 18 days. So again, they're covering a lot of land. And on the way, he reported there were dozens of cases of heat stroke. Of course, how could there not be? On August 2nd, after the Union Army had all been gathered in Springfield for a while by that point, a couple weeks, on August 2nd, there was a brief skirmish at a place called Doug Spring near modern-day Clever, Missouri. And there were Union losses, about 12 to 14 killed and about 40 wounded. And the wounded were all brought to Springfield. And here's a sketch of what the town of Springfield, Missouri looked like from late November. So it may not have looked exactly like this at the time of the battle, but wounded Union soldiers are brought here to this town even before the Battle of Wilson's Creek. So there's about 40 wounded prior to the battle. And of course, there were a lot of sick. Now, when the Union soldiers converge on Springfield, it was actually the first time that large of a Union force had been gathered in the state of Missouri since the beginning of the Civil War, just a few short months ago. And as we've talked about a variety of times on some of these live streams, anytime large numbers of people gathered and were living in close proximity, there were a lot of disease broke out. And Assistant Surgeon Philip Davis commented on there were a number of cases of typhoid fever that began, and dysentery that quote made their appearance. And so General Lyon ordered that a permanent hospital be established in town to care for all of these sick. And so they seized the unfinished courthouse building in town for that purpose. And Surgeon Davis was assigned to work there. And again, so there's 40 wounded soldiers, hundreds of sick soldiers already filling up a lot of the available space in the town of Springfield here, and the Battle of Wilson's Creek hasn't even happened yet. Another surgeon with the Union Army, he's got a pretty incredible name here, Surgeon Havilah Mowry Sprague. This image comes to us courtesy of American Civil War Surgical Antiques. I'm blanking on the gentleman's name, but very friendly. I sent him an email. I came across this picture of Surgeon Sprague, and he agreed to let me use it. Surgeon Sprague writes that the Army was well supplied when it came to medical supplies, but the medical supplies may not last as long as the medical department was hoping, given the size of the force here, about 6,000 soldiers. They also didn't have nearly as many medical instruments as Surgeon Sprague would have liked, given that the main medical depot all the way in St. Louis, which I'll remind you is not very close to where we are, on the opposite end of the state there, hundreds and hundreds of miles in between. Given that the main medical depot in St. Louis didn't have a lot of medical instruments, so all the surgeons are going to be relying on their own personal stores and instruments to help care for the wounded should there be a major battle, which of course we know there's going to be. Oops, wrong slide there. Caleb Dorsey Bear, a Confederate surgeon with the 2nd Missouri State Guard. Interestingly enough, Surgeon Bear is actually a Frederick native, but he winds up out in Missouri with the 2nd Missouri State Guard. He wrote of the rebel diet leading up to the Battle of Wilson's Creek. He wrote that, quote, "Our army had lived upon whatever could be obtained in the country, upon cornmeal so sour that the stock would not eat it. With this, they had only beef and no salt to season any of their food. They then commenced using roasting ears and made green corn soup composed of the green corn cut from the cob and boiled with a piece of beef." So not very appetizing. So part of what I'm trying to illustrate here is that both armies, the Union we know to be very sickly, and this one account we have of the Confederate diet, these soldiers are not in peak robust health going into the battle. So on the night of August 9th, the day before the battle, both armies had designs of attacking each other the following day, but heavy rainfall the night before delayed that plan, and so the Union ended up initiating the attack. So I'm going to go over here to a couple different maps here. One is a map, the one on the left is a map of pretty simple map. That green shaded area is what is currently the national park today. and it highlights a couple specific geographic features on the battle. It's a little bit less busy. It's going to be helpful to point to things. Now, the one on the right is from the American Battlefield Trust. They have maps for just about every Civil War battle you can imagine. Gives you sort of an idea of the troop placements. And if you want to compare them, you can see the green shaded area on both as the current national park site today. And so you can compare and contrast a little bit there. Assistant Surgeon Sprague, his command, which was fighting in the area of Bloody Hill, which you can see kind of on the northern portion of the field there. They only had 2 large spring wagon ambulances at their disposal. And they only had those 2 because General Lyon didn't want the rumbling of many wagons to alert the Confederacy that they were coming. This was intended to be a surprise attack on the Confederate camp. And that's going to be a common theme here, the lack of available ambulances. So at the start of the Civil War, one of the things that did not exist was an existing ambulance corps. There was no system in place for getting wounded off the battlefield and into hospitals. And we're going to see the damaging effects of that as we go along here. And so only a handful of Union surgeons actually go on the battlefield to do what they can to care for the wounded. And Assistant Surgeon Sprague is one of those people. Him and Assistant Surgeon Patee of the 2nd Kansas, they set up a temporary hospital station, what we would call a field dressing station, in a ravine behind the Northern Union line, near where the modern day visitor center is today. So we're talking at the top of your map here. You can see the modern day visitor center. It was likely somewhere in that ravine behind the main line of Union fighting there. It's in a ravine, so they can be sheltered, so they don't have to worry about bullets flying around them too much. And critically, there's a little stream, an offshoot of Wilson's Creek that goes through there, so they have abundant supply of water, which is useful. And that's the task for many surgeons throughout the Civil War, is identifying sheltered locations to care for wounded soldiers on the battlefield. Excuse me, it's never an easy thing to do because, of course, you don't know how the battle's going to go. Is it going to shift? Is your side going to do well? Are they not? If you're caring for people, you don't want them to be in danger of being shot again. So it's a tough dance to execute. So Surgeon Sprague sets up there in that ravine that you can see there, and the wounded who could walk went back to their position and were cared for there. And they're going there not necessarily because they know there's a field dressing station there, but they're going there because if they're wounded and they're able to walk, they're trying to get out of the way of getting shot again. And likely, of course we can't know, but likely they would have seen, a ravine and said, that's a place where I want to go, where I will be out of danger. And while there, perhaps they would come across this field dressing station set up back there. Now, the job of them, of these 2 surgeons on the battlefield, is going to be to stop the blood flow and to assess the severity of these injuries and try and get the most severely wounded to head back to Springfield, to the more permanent hospital setup that I was talking about earlier. That's called triage, by the way. They're not using that word, but that's effectively what they're doing. They're not performing any operations on the battlefield in these field dressing stations. And these surgeons say as much in their reports. We didn't do any operations on the battlefield. The only thing that they might have done is they're just removing bullets from the wounds and bandaging them up. That's about the extent to which they're doing it. I'm really amused actually in reading Surgeon Sprague's report. He goes out of his way to say that, quote, the attention shown the wounded was good, but not especially praiseworthy. His assessment that the care was adequate but not great I found to be particularly entertaining. And Surgeon Sprague knew of only one other surgeon besides himself and Surgeon Petit, who was on the battlefield, and that's Surgeon Cornwin of the 1st Missouri. And I was able to corroborate that in the report of Major General Samuel Sturgis, or maybe it's just Major, not Major General, I'm not sure. But Sturgis, who ends up taking over after Nathaniel Lyon is killed during the battle. Spoiler alert, the irascible Nathaniel Lyon doesn't make it through the battle, but Sturgis writes in his official report that, quote, Assistant Surgeon Sprague, Medical Department, attended the wounded with as much self-possession as though no battle was raging around him. Surgeon Cornwin of the 1st Missouri Volunteers not only took charge of the wounded as they were brought to him, but found time to use a musket with good effect from time to time against the enemy. And you do see occasional reports of that. Surgeons or later on ambulance corps members who are near the front line, sometimes they will pick up a musket and actually participate in the fight. It's kind of an odd thing to think about, and it's not common, but you do read about it sometimes. And that's just one other example of that taking place. There was another surgeon who, at least by his own account, suggested he was also on the battlefield, Surgeon W.H. White of the 1st Iowa. Let's see here. He reported that he had one wagon as an ambulance and no hospital tent. And so he surrendered his own personal tent to be used as a hospital tent, likely back in Missouri after the battle. He spent the battle on the reverse slope of the ridge where the 1st Iowa fought, which my guess is it was probably nearby wherever Sprague and Surgeon Petit set up. Obviously not too sure where he just says the reverse slope. The wounded were brought back to him by their comrades. He checked their bleeding, applied bandages as necessary, all that sort of stuff. And he later goes on to say that, you know, the battle eventually goes against the Union forces. And so when it seemed that the Union forces were going to start to pull back, the field dressing station started moving back with the Union Army. And then there were a few points where he reapplied dressings and sent the wounded on to Springfield on, and this is critical, he calls them commissary wagons. I had mentioned that there was no formal ambulance corps. If ambulances were to be used, and by ambulances we're talking wagons, if ambulances were going to be used by the medical department, they would come from the commissary department. Wagons that carried food in the event of a battle would be transitioned over to become medical wagons. And he points that out very specifically. He's sending them on commissary wagons. So these are not necessarily purpose-built to be ambulances, and they're not even really under their jurisdiction unless a battle comes around. And so eventually the Union soldiers start clearing the field and start retreating back towards Springfield. Now, for the part of the Confederacy, the Confederates are sort of briefly surrounded. There's Union soldiers to the north, as you can see on the map there, as well as to the south under Union General Franz Sigel. And so the Confederates are in the middle of this. There really isn't a rear for them to set up hospitals. And so by necessity, all of the Confederate medical department are kind of setting up hospitals kind of in the midst of Confederate lines throughout the battlefield. And there are a number of places where it gets set up at the Skegg Farm, S-K-E-G-G. You can see that near that little yellow section on the American Battlefield Trust map. The Skegg Farm, again, critically right on on Skeggs Branch, which is an offshoot from Wilson's Creek, so they would have abundant water. These are the calculations that surgeons are making. You know, where's the most advantageous place to set up a hospital? They're looking, of course, for any existing shelter, but they're also looking for running water to give to soldiers. Again, this is fought in August in the heat, so this is a hot day and water is going to become very important. They also set up field hospitals right at the kind of connection there where Wilson's Creek and Skeggs Branch meet up, right about there. Again, probably being drawn to that running water. They also set up a hospital at Edwards Cabin, Sterling Price's headquarters, as well as at the Ray House, all the way over on the right of the Confederate line there. So those are just a few places where we know that they set up field hospitals, which would go on to treat wounded, you know, in the days after the battle. I have a quote here from Dr. W.A. Cantrell of the 1st Arkansas Mounted Rifles. He wrote, "In the beginning of the battle, I was amidst the hottest of the time and thought at one time I could not escape death. Balls from 2,000 guns and one battery of cannon were flying thickly around me. Here and there a man or horse would fall, some wounded, others dead. The battle raged for 4 or 5 hours, hard fighting all the time. My work began soon after the first round or two of musketry. The wounded were then brought to me, and from that moment to the present time, I have seen or heard nothing but gunshot wounds and the groans of the dying and the distressed." So things were pretty intense, as you can tell from that account. Dr. Caleb Winfrey is another Confederate surgeon we know of who was on the battlefield. And he was described as being out there in his horse and buggy on the battlefield, which I'm sure was made for an interesting sight. And he was, you know, one of the doctors that was going to the patients. And afterwards, when the battle subsided, he ended up at the Ray House on the right of the Confederate line. And he was working there, performing surgeries well into the next day, and then eventually moved over into Springfield, which we're going to get to in just a little bit. So once the battle was over, the Union soldiers had retreated to Springfield, excuse me, which was just a little bit northeast of the main battlefield. And they weren't there for terribly long when they decided to retreat even further away. And they left, they took as many of their wounded as they could with them, but the majority of the wounded were left either on the battlefield or in the town of Springfield. The Confederates, victorious, they occupied the field, and then they start getting on with the task of caring for not just their wounded, but also some of the Union wounded as well. Now, a number of Union surgeons have been left behind, and so the Confederate surgeons and the Union surgeons now are all kind of working together at this point to care for the larger and complete and total wounded. So the battle, which saw in total about 18,000 soldiers in conflict with each other, produced about 1,800 wounded soldiers and 550 dead. That's between the two armies combined. So both sides, they have to figure out how to care for these people. Confederate surgeon Caleb Dorsey Bear wrote that evening, quote, "By night, our dead and wounded have been carefully collected from the different parts of the field, and each regiment and division having selected their own burying ground. The dead were as decently buried as the condition of things would permit." With the Confederacy holding the field, they were also tasked with burying the dead, those 550 dead that I mentioned. And more often than not, and I'm sure there were probably a few exceptions to this, but whichever side was tasked with burying the dead would likely start with soldiers from, you know, their own side, even though they're ultimately going to bury everybody. And I'm certain that was, probably how it was done, throughout the war. So with the Confederate soldiers buried, then they turned their attention to the Union soldiers. And throughout all of this, of course, the medical department is turning their attention towards the wounded soldiers who need caring for. Now, going back to Assistant Surgeon Philip Davis, who was tasked with working at the more permanent hospital set up in the town of Springfield at the unfinished courthouse. The Union Army left behind their medicine and hospital stores and supplies, which had been accumulated at the unfinished courthouse where he was working. And so Davis was one of the surgeons left behind to stay and care for the wounded, as were, let me see if I can find that. Yeah, as were Surgeon Samuel H. Melcher, Surgeon E.C. Franklin, Surgeons S.D. Smith. So those four are left behind to oversee the care for the Union wounded. Now, the trick for the Union Army was, since all of their resources are suddenly gone and there were so few ambulances to speak of anyway, the Union soldiers remain on the battlefield for days following the battle. And they're sort of reliant at times on the Confederate ambulances to go and bring them back to Springfield to get them into the hospital. Not to mention, since there were Union forces, there was an attempt to kind of surround the Confederate camp. The Union soldiers are kind of scattered all over the place. So this task for getting the wounded soldiers off the battlefield becomes monumental. And this is something that both armies get significantly better at over the course of the war. But one of the things that some of the early battles of the war, battles like Bull Run, which had already happened, by the time Wilson's Creek rolls around, and Wilson's Creek itself, it brings into sharp relief the desperate need for good ambulances and a dedicated system for getting wounded soldiers off the battlefield. And that comes about thanks to the efforts of Surgeon Jonathan Letterman, who I'm sure you've heard us talk about, and that's the subject of a whole other conversation. But my main point is this difficulty that they have in getting the wounded soldiers into hospitals is a theme in some of these early battles of the Civil War, and one that they eventually do address. And the ambulance system that gets put in place, I should add, the kind of skeleton of that is still with us today. That sort of modern ambulance system that prioritizes speed in getting people to hospitals quickly. That's still the basis for ambulances as we know them today. Getting a phone call here. There we go. See, I'm in the office and phones ring. Anyway, so wounded soldiers are slowly but surely coming back to the hospital in Springfield, and about 200 of the wounded Union soldiers left with the retreating Union Army, who are destined for St. Louis, but the remainder are kept in Springfield. To quote Assistant Surgeon Davis, who's on the ground there, he wrote, "The wounded were brought from the field in wagons, carriages, ambulances, litters, and in fact, every kind of conveyance which could be brought into requisition." And it took them about 5 to 6 days to get all the wounded into the hospital. Now, once the Confederacy moves into Springfield, as Assistant Surgeon Philip Davis tells of it, the Confederacy end up taking a lot of the Union medical supplies to use for their own soldiers. So things were pretty tight. Davis wrote, quote, "Nothing was furnished us by the Confederates," as they took many of their medical supplies. They only gave back what they didn't need. As he put it, quote, "we being allowed the privilege of using only such as would not benefit them." But they managed to find their way around it. He writes that they were able to purchase all of the medical supplies they needed. He's not very clear about who they purchased the medical supplies from, whether that was from the Confederates or from local townspeople. But Davis writes in his official report in the Medical and Surgical History, he writes that they ended up spending about $5,000 on medical supplies. And they end up being fine. He doesn't comment, and in fact, none of the surgeons who were there comment on being short on anything, but I think the greatest difficulty was actually acquiring the supplies, but they eventually were able to get them, and they didn't, again, report on any shortcomings. Davis wrote that the churches, hotels, courthouse, and nearly all of the private dwellings were filled with the wounded of both sides. So in that image that you see on your screen there, just imagine every single one of those buildings filled with wounded soldiers, and indeed probably dotting some of the surrounding landscape, under trees or anything, trying to get shade if there was no room inside. Davis also comments on their use of chloroform as anesthesia. If you haven't heard us talk about it before, they did have anesthesia at the time of the Civil War. We're talking about chloroform and ether. And almost every surgeon that was there talks about their abundant use of chloroform when it comes to surgeries, and they're performing many surgeries at this point, in the days following the battle. Once the soldiers are in these stable environments, once they're inside some of these buildings, that's when they're performing the operations and using the chloroform. And in some ways, it's amazing that we have all the reports that we do about the battle at Wilson's Creek. And I'm drawing a lot of this from the medical and surgical history of the War of the Rebellion. It's a great source, all available free online. Anyone can go and look it up. But Davis says in his report that, quote, "Of the whole number of deaths, I am ignorant, as patients were visited by other surgeons in various parts of the village, and no record was kept by them owing to the unsettled condition of affairs." And so Davis eventually writes this report, many weeks after the fact, but it's amazing that, we have any recollections of it, because of course you really get kind of a frantic nature. When he says, as patients were visited by other surgeons in various parts of the village, you can kind of imagine these surgeons, both Union and Confederate, certainly overworked, frantically going from building to building and putting out, fires as they come up, not literal, but putting out, addressing any issues from, the wounded soldiers right in front of them, because there are so few surgeons relative to the high number of wounded. And of course, that's a theme throughout a lot of Civil War medicine. Now, while there are plenty of amputations performed, that was not done in every case where someone is shot. That's one of the myths that we try and bust here at the museum. Amputation is not the only surgical procedure. And I'll point to Assistant Surgeon Samuel Melcher here, one of the people who stayed behind in Springfield. He writes in his report of treating a number of soldiers with, quote, Liston's straight splint. So he's using a specific splint to kind of immobilize a broken bone in the hopes that it will, heal itself and an amputation might not be necessary. So amputations are not only resorted to, they know how to set broken bones, and indeed we have records of them setting broken bones after this battle in particular. Surgeon Melcher also commented on the abundance of flies. He wrote that, quote, "The flies were exceedingly troublesome after the battle, maggots forming in the wounds in less than an hour after dressing them, and also upon any clothing or bedding soiled by blood or pus." And he also noted that the wounded brought in from the field were, quote, "swarming with maggots." So a pretty wild situation. And even though I believe that maggots actually, sort of serve to eat away unpleasant things doesn't mean it's not gross. And sorry to anyone who might be eating lunch while watching this presentation. He's not the only doctor that comments on that. Confederate Dr. John Wyatt, the Missouri State Guard, wrote that I saw blowflies swarm over the living and dead alike. I saw men not yet dead with their eyes and nose full of maggots. So it's a pervasive thing commented on by a number of different people. Again, super skeevy, just gives you an idea of, it's hot, flies are swarming around, and, they don't have effective means of getting rid of them. So eventually, after a long period of time, things get stabilized, and the days after the battle, they start to kind of slip into weeks. Eventually, some of the Union soldiers, the wounded who are there, they get paroled. So the wounded left behind, they're captured, and they're immediately paroled, meaning they can go free as long as they're exchanged for a like number of Confederate prisoners. That's something that ends up getting established as the war goes on. But eventually, these wounded Union soldiers start to leave as they're able. And they start leaving in groups with one particular Union surgeon to kind of shepherd them on their way and, make sure that no medical complications arise as a part of the journey. So the first group leaves with Surgeon E.C. Franklin on September 7th, so not quite a month after the battle. On September 20th, a couple weeks later, the next group leaves with Surgeon Philip C. Davis for the Union forces to head back towards Rolla, Missouri. This is about 100 miles away, and their ultimate destination is St. Louis. Now, there is a railhead at Rolla, which they can take a train back to St. Louis. But here's a map that I just whipped up on Google Maps. So you can see the distance between Wilson's Creek National Battlefield and Springfield. I mean, they're fairly close together, but they're not like right next to each other. So there's a little bit of distance just to get from the battlefield to Springfield. And then from Springfield, it's, as you can see, a long way to St. Louis, which is the ultimate destination. By modern roads, we're looking at 227-mile journey. Maybe not necessarily that, it could be shorter or longer, I'm not sure exactly, in 19th century journey. But again, imagine these soldiers with serious injuries if they had to remain in place for an entire month, being jostled around on these wagons and things. Davis writes of their journey back to St. Louis that they were interrupted a number of times by roaming bands of Confederates. Missouri is a border state. It's pretty rural for the most part, and so there's not much in the way of organization, law and order, or whatever you want to call it. And so they're just kind of roaming bands of Confederate and pro-Union guerrillas, militia. So this journey is not guaranteed to be safe. They don't end up having any serious interruptions, thankfully, on their way back to St. Louis, though. The final group of wounded Union soldiers end up leaving with Melcher. He takes the final 209 wounded and sick soldiers, and they leave during October. He sent 150 of the patients ahead onto Rolla, and finally on November 11th, Melcher leaves with the wounded, and they finally arrive in St. Louis on November 19th. So the Battle of Wilson's Creek is fought on August 10th, and the last of the wounded make it back to St. Louis. Last of the Union wounded make it back to St. Louis, November 19th, a full, 3.5 months later. So these Civil War battles, the main point I want to make there is that these Civil War battles, they might last, the fighting might last 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, or if it's something like a siege at Petersburg, can go on for months. But these battles are not over when the shooting stops. There are consequences that last months afterwards for the soldiers who are wounded, the doctors who have to care for them, the people whose homes that are, they need to care for the soldiers in. Civil War battles are so much more than something that happens just on the battlefield. Finally, one of the larger lessons of this battle comes to us from Assistant Surgeon Sprague. In one of the final comments in his report, it's sort of a devastating critique of the way that things were handled. I'll read it to you. He says, quote, "At no time during the engagement was the situation of ambulances considered safe. The enemy's cavalry were continually threatening our rear. No one acted as medical director, and there were no drilled ambulance corps, and the wounded were not systematically carried from the field. The severely wounded could only be moved on stretchers and were not carried off until after the engagement. The great want in the medical department was ahead. There was no medical director. The regiments had no community of action or feeling. Had the commanding general designated an officer of rank as his medical director, there could have been no reason why 9/10 of the wounded could not have been cared for and sent to general hospitals by the time our forces retreated." So just a devastating critique of the way things were handled, criticizing the lack of organization in getting wounded off the battlefield, something, as I mentioned, that does get better over the course of the war, but no medical director on either side. Neither the Confederates nor the Union Army had a medical director, and that sort of directly leads to this disorganized response. And that's why I think you will find that I think kind of explains why there were so few Union surgeons on the battlefield as the battle was happening. It's sort of left up to the discretion of the individual surgeons where they think they can best be utilized. And so after the Battle of Wilson's Creek, there's never a battle that a major Union Army fights in where there isn't a medical director present on the field. So, and I'm sure it wasn't just the comments of Sprague that made that change. I'm sure it was apparent, or maybe someone, people just figured it was a good idea. I'm not sure exactly why, when, or how that changed, but it does after Wilson's Creek. So if there are any lessons to be learned from the medical response, it's the importance of an ambulance corps and an organized medical department chaired by a medical director. And over the course of the war, those are two things that do improve. So in these early battles of the Civil War, they're clumsy because the armies don't really know exactly what they're getting themselves into. And they provide a lot of lessons that both armies actually do learn from, but it does come at the expense of a lot of wounded soldiers that have to suffer out on the field and be sort of exposed there. So that's what I have to say about the Battle of Wilson's Creek. I hope you enjoyed. I'm going to try and pull up the live stream here and look at questions. Let me see if I can do that here. Hopefully you all enjoyed. Let me see here. I'm having troubles looking at finding the comments from the back end. So I'm pulling them up on my other monitor here. Okay, got them, pulling them up here. People tuning in. Let's see. Andrea Lee Pike asks, was the water flowing quickly or was it stagnant? I believe that Sprague talks about the fact that the water was flowing. I'm fairly certain it was not stagnant. So it is an offshoot of Wilson's Creek, and so I believe, under normal circumstances it would be flowing, and I'm pretty sure he comments on the fact that it was flowing. Let me see here. Robert Lustrea asks, what comparisons and or contrasts in medical care do you see between First Manassas and Wilson's Creek? Kind of like I was saying, just being unprepared, lack of preparation from both armies. Again, they don't quite know what they're getting themselves into. So that's one. Certainly the lack of an ambulance corps. I mean, there's a lot of similarities. The primary contrast is that Wilson's Creek, even though the town of Springfield is nearby, it's fought. I mean, the majority of Missouri is rural. And one of the troubles with fighting battles in rural areas is sometimes there's just no shelter, like there's no structures for miles to put these soldiers in. And that was part of the issue with the Battle of Pea Ridge, fought nearby just across the border in Arkansas. We have a great, I'll toot my own horn here, me and Jimmy Horn, we wrote a blog post on our website about the medical response to the Battle of Pea Ridge, and that was something that we noticed, that there's just no structures. There's nowhere for the wounded Union soldiers to go, and so you got to put them under trees and stuff. And so they were a little bit better off at Wilson's Creek, but at the Battle of First Bull Run, Washington, D.C. and Richmond are not, I mean, they're not close, but abundant places are, within a day's, ride or trip or whatever. So there is stuff. So that is one of the contrasts, but they're more similar than they are different. And I think it's instructive to compare the two of them, since they're two of the first major battles of the Civil War and they're two data points that both medical departments learn from extensively. Yes, Andrea says no picnic lunches at Wilson's Creek. Andrea also asks, how long would it have taken them to get the wounded from Springfield to St. Louis? It's about 200 miles away. That couldn't have been a comfortable trip. Absolutely correct. Not a comfortable trip. And the last trip that Surgeon Melcher talks about them leaving on November 11th, and they get there on November 19th. So a little bit over a week, but that depends on, all number of things, how often they're interrupted, or if they are, if any kind of serious medical complications arise where part of the convoy has to stop. So there's a lot of variables there, but we're talking at least a week, at least. Robert Smith comments, maggots could indeed be beneficial. You're absolutely right about that. Still gross. Let's see here. Andrea asked, did they wash the maggots out with water or some sort of solution? Yes, and it's hard to say if this really made things any better. His solution, Surgeon Melcher's solution, was to get rid of the maggots by sprinkling calomel on the open wound. Calomel is a mercury-heavy substance. It's a kind of mixture of a few different things, but nothing like a little mercury to get rid of the maggots. So any benefits the maggots may have had were probably counteracted by the calomel that was sprinkled in there to get rid of. And Robert Smith clarifies here, maggots actually eat the dead tissue, reducing the risk of infection. At the time, they didn't know about the microbes' role of infection. They thought pus was laudable. Absolutely, you're dead on the nose there, Robert. And so here we are at the end of the questions there. If you have any other questions, I'll probably say a few things here. Thanks for watching. If you have any other questions, drop them in the comments now. Thanks so much for watching and joining us today on the 159th anniversary of the Battle of Wilson's Creek. Although, as I mentioned, these battles extend much longer than just the actual day of the battle. So it was a pleasure to get to talk with you all about this and share some of the research I've done. I have a blog post on this subject that just went up on our blog on the website, civilwarmed.org. /Wilsons-Creek. So if you want to read more about it or recap some of this, go ahead and check that out. Share the stream if you enjoyed it. Tell one of your friends that lives in Missouri to go check out the national park near there. Like the video, tell your friends about the video. And if you've been enjoying these videos, maybe consider becoming a member of the National Museum of Civil War Medicine. It really helps us as we try and do what we can to continue bringing you content during the pandemic. Our doors are open on weekends, but we're still trying to reach people who maybe can't comfortably come visit us. So this is all part of our effort to bring Civil War medicine to you. And if you like that, and if you want to support that, becoming a member is the best way to do it. It's the best way to kind of be a part of what we do here. And again, very thankful to everyone who has done so. And we'd love to have more of you join us. So with all that said, I will see you all on Thursday. We're going to be back on Thursday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We're going to be talking about some of the cool resources on our website, one of which just went live, I think last week, some of the searchable databases. And we're going to be with our Director of Research talking about all that. Should be a fun time, and we hope to have you with us this upcoming Thursday. So until next time, we'll catch you on Thursday. So thanks for joining us. Bye.